And good afternoon, everyone. And I am joining us from a landline computer in one of our classroom labs. So I don't, if I tried to do this from Wi-Fi in my office, I would freeze up every 90 seconds or so, and that would be really unpleasant. So I'm going to sit here instead. So just go around and check in with folks before we dive into our paper. So Greg, what are you up to lately?
Well, teaching the usual human anatomy and human physiology as I do every quarter, in person, which is fun.
You never know now, so yeah.
Yeah, so enjoying that. And I owe Sabi an email. Sabi, thank you for your emails. I will reply.
So why don't we go to Sabi next then with that transition? Sabi, how are you doing? You're muted. There you go.
Okay, yeah, I'm unmuted now. For some reason, I had problem like getting into this meeting room.
No worries. Well, your timing was perfect. We literally were just like finishing up our small talk when you got in here. So.
Oh yeah. So it was. Well, I guess I'm teaching most of the time. I'm teaching in the graduate certificate program, and that's the syllabus which I sent you, Greg.
Yes.
And that I really enjoy teaching that class because it is comparatively less stressful than the medical students, because once they're in med school, I'm not a clinician. So in 6 months, they seem to know everything. They know much more about clinical stuff than I know. So it's a little challenging. So I just got done with my neuro lecture. I have a few neuro lectures in the med school in the second year. I got that done yesterday.
Hi.
And I'm teaching the graduate students to some physiology that's once a week. So mainly 3 days a week I do teaching and a bunch of other stuff. So committee work and all those things.
Keeps you busy.
Yeah.
And then Becca, how are we doing?
Hanging in there. Greg, Rachel Hutto is also applying for that Everett position. So we have two of the folks that have been in the program that I run are applying for faculty positions at, or for one, two are applying for one faculty position at.
That's it. Yay! I got it. Yeah.
Last quarter I was I still am on our campus committee for promotion, and so quarter I had about 30 files to read, and it was pretty
I have not had the pleasure of doing that here yet, so
I love it. It's an amazing opportunity to celebrate the work that people on campus are doing, but it's really time consuming. And usually I have 2 course releases with that position because I chair the committee, but I couldn't take one of those releases in the fall, which that just didn't work out this year. So last quarter was quite overcommitted, and I'm finding my breath again, and finding time to come to book club again.
Wonderful. Yeah, life is more amenable now. I bet.
Is indeed. How about you, Mike?
So it's funny. Everyone's going to be sick of hearing about this by the time we get to May, but Sabi tripped my mind on it. I am a stopgap fill-in for our neurobiology curriculum this semester. And so I know more about action potential right now than I have known since like the mid 1990s. And it's actually been sort of fun in we're supposed to all be learners, right? And so I have been learning right before I teach. The reason I'm in this is all the molecular stuff. Like I'm basically the closest person to it curricularly. I will never have to do this again, God willing, but it's an interesting ride right now to sort of learn this as I go.
Which textbook are you primarily?
So it's just basically called an Intro to Neurobiology, second edition, Luo, I believe. Lucan, Luo. Forgive me for getting this. It's either Luo, Luquin, or Luquin, Luo, and I forget which is first name and which is last name. And for getting someone like me through, it's working really well.
Okay, Intro to Neurobiology. So that's even neuroscience is not my strong point. So I also struggle with that.
Yeah. And I'm not even, the funny thing about this is I'm looking at it last week and it's getting into all this electrical circuit stuff. And I'm like, I am definitely not thought about this since 1995, like give or take. So there's definitely some quick reminders for me. All right. I was somewhat selfish in picking this paper because this is something I've been interested in for a while and haven't done a lot with myself. This whole idea of peer mentoring and being able to scale up peer mentoring into something that would be programmatic, something that would be available and accessible to everyone in a given class. So this intrigued me. I thought this was an intriguing work. I was excited that they had the volume of students here necessary to do something that would hold some statistical rigor. So you would get a sense of what it is they are hopefully positively getting out of this experience. I've been leading off these conversations with just some general assessment of you guys with respect to your potential encounters with peer mentorship or near peer mentorship in your own programs. Do you guys have, maybe not to this level of sophistication, but do you guys have programs like this? And if you do, how do you orchestrate them?
Well, what we have is not peer mentorship per se. We have like tutors where the upper level students, they tutor the second year med school students, they do tutoring for the first year. And it seems to work out really well because the students relate much better to their near peers. Because they just gone through that experience maybe 6 months before, and they can explain the concepts in much better manner. So that sort of thing happen. And it can be informally, they have sessions informally, or it can be more formalized where the tutors are given a little stipend to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Becca and Greg, anything at your institutions that would be comparable to this?
No.
We've had the conversation about what this would look like at a community college level, right? I mean, having 2 years instead of 4 sort of makes the idea of an upperclassman a little different, obviously. Scheduling would be, I imagine, another challenge for something like this.
But also there's everything, all instruction is taught by professors branding that, we don't rely on TAs, we don't rely on students, it's all the faculty. So there's that.
It is so funny you say that because that has happened. It's not so much institutional as like a couple of my colleagues get like super sensitive whenever we bring up anything related to this kind of thing. And they say the exact same thing, but we say we don't do anything with TA. I'm like, but that's not what this is, but okay. Yeah. So it's fun. I'm glad you say that. I'm like, I have real life experience with that one too.
Yep.
Sabi, let me come back to you briefly there. So you mentioned payment. How do you select your folks, the upperclassmen that serve as the tutors? Like what criteria do you look for?
Well, one of the criteria is obviously interest. Some students, they want to teach, right? So in the med schools, and for them, probably the money is not that important, because they get like educational loan and it is really minimal money in the grand scheme of things where they have to spend thousands of dollars on their tuition and fees. But first is interest. You have to be interested, and then we look at how they did in the course. If they did, they should be reasonable. Till now, what we have found, students who have done well in the course, maybe in the first 10%, they seem to volunteer for these type of activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and take a look at what we actually have here in this biome program, biology, mentoring, and engagement. And I want to skip right down to how they theoretically ground this and the cohorts that they're looking at. And so we're looking at introductory biology majors, or new biology majors, I should say, at UC Santa Barbara. And they can opt in to this supplemental program. So it's completely voluntary. And you can see there by the numbers, they get, what, 15% of the students, give or take, to sign into it. What's really cool, looking at table 1, is the similarities between the different demographics in the general pool versus the biome pool. So they're not getting any biases simply by the basis of who is enrolling. Interesting things in here besides that are the 2-to-1 ratio of females to males, which I'm sure you guys have the same thing in my experience too. That seems to be the way it is most places now in terms of what you see in biology classes, but also the similarities there of peer population, of low income population, and those really high SAT scores. I was actually pretty impressed by that too, in terms of what you see as an average going into this course. So over here on the figure on the left, you see what they're thinking about in terms of the mentor-mentee relationship, but then in red, what they're actually doing and what they're hoping to pass along to these students. The supplemental material that's being done is not biology. It is how to college. It is metacognition. It is things like that. They want to teach people how to not just survive, but also to excel in college. And so they're going to go ahead and look at retention and grades. They do this with a chemistry class instead of a biology class, which, not so much a criticism, I guess, is just an observation of the way their curriculum is structured, that incoming students would be taking these chemistry classes probably in most likelihood before they were taking the biology. And so if they're trying to do this indication of retention from in the biology major, even though it's not a biology class, the chemistry class would be a stand-in in terms of, is the grade going up? Are people still enrolling in the one semester class versus the next? There's some question to be had, as there usually is when people do this, about the idea of using one's grades as an assessment of a classroom technique increasing. How does one determine the grades? Is it all exams? Are there other components as well? That's another just thing to bring up here in terms of assessing the assessment, as it will, what it is they're putting into this and the metrics they've chosen to have us look at this. Again, it's opt-in, it's 1 unit, it is pass, no pass. That's important as well. You're not being graded in this particular endeavor. Okay, so with all of that, and their definition of these skills, these survival how to college skills, academic habit complexity. And so that's the term they're going to use within the statistics to try to explain what it is we're going to see. And so their goal, again, is not to see how they're doing in biology. It is to see if they can improve, as they say here, the academic habits. I think sometimes we call this study skills, but maybe that doesn't adequately incorporate all the stuff that would go into that. And then what does it have to do with their performance in Chem 1A and then retention into Chem 1B? And then is there a different impact on the peer population? So here are the 3 markers or instruments that they're choosing, not instruments, I meant markers, that they're choosing to use, and the data from which this came. And then some statistics that I am not even going to attempt to explain to you because it is out of my realm. And the rest of the paper is basically about the correlations that they find. So I think I'd like to ask you, before we dive into that, the idea of the logistics and structure of what are here. Greg already alluded to this a little bit in his setting. is there a feasible option for something like this in your background, in your institution, where you could have upperclassmen that are selected that would meet with underclassmen and talk through some of these study ideas, these academic complexity ideas? Is this something you could envision, or what would the barriers be maybe to implementing something like this at your institution?
Well, just to kind of build off of what I said before, although the peer mentor thing doesn't work for us currently, we actually require all students to take a College 101 or STEM 101 course for 2 credits to hopefully give them many of those study skills and academic habits. So
interesting.
So we are doing that part. We just don't have the subject specific help when the students are actually taking their disciplinary courses.
So it's how long have you done that?
I feel like it predates me.
Okay.
So it's been a while.
Because I mean, you could do the equivalent analysis, right? Like pre-implementation, post-implementation, has that particular intervention assisted in people staying at your institution, getting better grades at your institutions? You could do the same study. It'd be curious to know, based on that, then 2 credits is a bunch. Like, how much time are they spending in that?
Well, I think it's a couple classroom hours per week, and then I'm not sure how much homework they have. Some.
Yeah. Because I'm used to more of the model you see here, where it's like, oh, we're going to meet like an hour a week and no big deal. And so that sounds like a more serious or structured version of some of this stuff.
Remember, there's also a quarter semester difference.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So often when we're teaching in quarters, we need to take the same amount of content and squeeze it into less time.
I had one experience in my life with that, of cramming a 14-week course into 9.5 weeks, and it was an interesting endeavor for me. I had asked Sabi before about selection, because that's something that I think about in potentially doing something like this, would be how you identify the upperclassmen and who would be the, what characteristics would you look for? Like, I've seen many examples of, smarter is not better per se. In fact, a lot of times smarter is absolutely not better. There's a certain, they don't have the best GPAs in the world, but they have other skills, some of which could be communication. And that would be more favorable in this particular background. But just thinking about how,
I would also say enthusiasm. The person should be enthusiastic, like enjoy interacting with students, and so that is, you're right. It does not have to be a total nerd and be the top student in the class. They might not be the best fit.
Yeah, communication and enthusiasm, absolutely. I would love it if they wanted to be there. That would be great. And they're not just doing it for money or credit or something like that. That's a certainly good point.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Mike, if I could just ask a follow-up question to Greg.
Please.
I'm curious about requiring the study skills course for everybody, because community college has such a diverse population of students, and I would think that some are college ready and some aren't. So what is that course like for the college ready students?
Well, having not a lot of direct experience with it, I assume it's boring. I assume it's like an easy 2 credits that maybe they just aren't faced by.
Yeah.
But that's just a guess.
Maybe not boring, but I hope it's an easy 2 credits.
Yeah, I would be. So, I think boring and an easy 2 credits are 2 different things.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that I have a student in my family who, if he's bored, he's not going to do the work.
Yeah.
So I would,
well, I was being a little flippant. I think there is a danger there of the student who feels like, oh, this is a remedial course, I already know this stuff. They might feel bored and they might not do the work that they're supposed to, but I don't know. Becca, do you know Ricky Dooley at all? Okay. So he's one of the people who in biology here who's kind of been driving this thing, but he would know much more than I do.
Is that just for biology or is it for the whole school?
Yeah, no, there's College 101 for anybody. And then the relatively recent change has been the STEM offers a STEM 101 version of it, which is more STEM specific.
Cool. And that's it, that replaces College 101, not
right.
in addition to.
It does.
Okay.
It does. Yeah.
So table 3 here starts the statistical analysis. And what they're trying to show here is not just the efficacy of biome, but also are there particular groups that favor or receive more of a benefit than the others. And so first off, in table 3, the regression analysis is suggesting significant increases in academic habit complexity. So the students are embracing some of those ideas. And then here, using final grades in Chem 1A, again, based on GPA, in trying to look at when and where people are succeeding or not succeeding, can I make some predictions on how well people are doing based on some kind of prior characteristic? And some of these things aren't too surprising. A good high school GPA, they tend to do decent in Chem 1A. Okay, I believe that. A good SAT math score, same thing, makes sense. This is the one that's really important. Academic habit complexity also shows that correlation. And then the rest of the chart here is about correlation with any of the particular student groups that are subject to this analysis. So can I expect white or Asian students to do better than peer students based on what you're seeing here? Or to clarify, people who have taken the supplemental course, are they actually doing better or getting more augmentation based on ethnicity or gender or first generation status? None of those numbers turn out to be specific. So it seems that, number one, there is a benefit to getting students to think more about a more diverse toolbox of academic habits to pursue in their studies, and that this benefit does not seem to be confined to a particular group or to be accentuated to a particular group. And so there is a universal benefit that is found for those who have opted in. Now, you can ask the question, and they had said in here that I believe it's about half a grade increase in people who had done the biome program versus those who had not. Is using the final grade in Chem 1A a reasonable tool for measuring how people are, or what people are getting out of the biome program? Is there a way to longitudinally examine if people are retaining some of the ideas they had or obtained in this program in their later coursework? That's beyond the scale of what they're doing here. But is this a good way to do this? I guess is what I'm driving at. Are there alternative ways of measuring this, or is this a sufficient way to try to figure out potential gains from the how to college portion of the program? I don't know if people have other ideas about how this could be assessed.
So one thing that I'm a rabbit hole that I'm going down, which is peripheral to this, but I hope still important, is to think about the framing of the paper and whether it's coming from a deficit model.
Okay.
So in a deficit model, it would be saying, all right, white folks are a reference group. Can other people catch up to them?
Hmm.
and it's norming white behavior. So one of the things, so I often fall into the trap of thinking this way, and I'm really hard to move from it. And one of the ways to do this would be to be thinking about which study skills are being taught, and if they're all study skills that are normed in white culture, or if there are other study skills that can be lifted up that are valued in other approaches to learning.
I hadn't thought of it that way, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that kind of relates to, and here's where I reveal that I didn't spend much time with this paper, but I'm nonetheless trying to learn from it, is like, I haven't yet figured out quite what they mean by academic habit complexity. So there's apparently a big suite of skills or habits that they're surveying. And I think Becca is asking, what is the nature of those? Are they kind of white?
I would have liked to have seen more about what actually happened in biome in the paper, and we're not given that. Yeah. That would certainly help understand like what we were getting out of this, or what the students would be getting out of this. They mentioned metacognition. That's like the one thing that sticks in my head of like, okay, they're doing that somehow in this course. You are trusting this to upperclassmen, undergraduates to teach. There needs to be well, one would hope there would be training for these individuals in how to be an effective facilitator for these discussions, which is another thing you'd have to think about here. To be fair to the paper just wants to show you the efficacy of the program, but it would be nice to know more about how those other nuts and bolts actually function here.
So I'm just opening up the supplemental materials.
Yeah.
And I found a table that I think is maybe going over the.
I think it is, yeah.
So it's like supplemental figure 1A, the ranked rash difficulty. How many times in the last 2 weeks have you worked on practice problems that won't be graded? Asked another student a question, planned my social time around my study schedule. So there's this long list.
Yeah.
So I guess biome helped students do more of those on average,
right?
Maybe.
I'm just very surprised that like, it seems like that should have been in the paper and not relegated to supplemental material.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's look at this even more detailed. So here with this propensity score match sample, GPA, Chem 1A being used as the variable. And so am I seeing particular differences that I can correlate down to particular deviations in group, cohort, whatever you want to throw on here? There are some interesting variables that they consider down here with respect to socioeconomic background, parents' education, from what parental income are the students deriving from. Once again, ethnicity pops up. Can you correlate any of these groups to propensity to succeed? You'll see in the ethnicity group, there is the Asian and international student group. Well, actually, peer is on that same level, showing not quite significant in the case of international and peer, but there is some at least low p-value. High school GPA, again, does appear to be a pretty good predictor. SAT scores to some extent, but then importantly, participation in the biome program does show that significance. The numbers here with the cohorts would suggest that they year you entered did not make a huge degree of difference, and that your particular background, not ethnicity, but background, did not appear to make a particular difference at all, or minimal difference. Again, they're trying to look at all these different options to see if there's any particular biases isn't the right word, but slants of particular groups receiving more or less benefit from this than any other group. And these are the retention figures. And so we're looking at the same ideas, and we're trying to figure out if there's correlation down the line. And actually, the biome program, 0.008, sorry, so there is, I was about to say there wasn't significance, but there totally is. You see a predictor in biome here in actually going from Chem 1A to Chem 1B. Are people still stubbornly sticking with that, even if they're not going to retain? Like, you can always read into this a little bit about it not being the be all end all about why someone stayed in a curriculum versus another. But they do see that correlation here as identified in these stats in terms of people who went through the biome program and that actually were retained in the projection to be a biology major. And you see some of these other correlations. A bunch of them actually go away. The ethnicity correlations go away. High school GPA and SAT math score still seem to be the only ones that would have any other correlation. So did anyone have any questions or concerns or just ideas based on what they're trying to tell us here? Again, I think the interesting part that we've sort of addressed is their choice of instrumentation here. The reliance on these chemistry classes for predicting a biology trajectory, and is a GPA or GPA points, is that an effective way to measure student outcomes in this case? Certainly not the only way. And I think that's the gist of this paper. And so the main thing I would then want to, again, come back to is this idea. Becca, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just in answer to your previous question.
Oh, yeah.
It's the best way to capture future success. I think that's what you were.
Yeah.
And again, I would just point out that this is a very white norm of what success means. And that
we actually read last year, we had another paper about like what is success. And so I'm glad you bring that up.
Is that the Weatherton and Schisler?
I think so.
Essay?
I don't know.
I love that essay. I think it's so pertinent to our
It certainly made me think about something I never thought about before. So it did its job.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, this means that I need to rethink what grades mean.
Mm-hmm.
I
have the ungrading book on my ottoman. Like, yes. I totally want to read and learn more about that.
Yeah, Greg and I were actually talking about this a couple weeks ago, that we were in different SABRE reading groups last summer about the ungrading book, and I've implemented ungrading in all of my classes now.
How's it going? Now I'm really curious.
I love it. I just love it. Yeah. And I should say that I don't do many tests. Mm-hmm. So I really try to diversify what achievement looks like in my class. What is how the ways in which students can demonstrate what they've learned. So Sabi, it's different than from you. I'm not teaching medical students. Right. I don't, I'm not looking for a set of programmed responses to happen in a clinical setting, for example. Yeah. But what yeah, this is just a very traditional look at what success and
Yeah.
and what future success mean. I'll just
What exactly are you looking at? Because so
in my courses.
yeah, like how what determines whether the student has, say, passed the course?
Yeah, so in the course that I taught last fall, it was a course in which students, it was a CURE, one of these undergraduate course-based research classes, classroom-based undergraduate research experience there, that's the acronym. And students needed to write a scientific paper about a novel question that they asked. And we were using, I'm a paleontologist by training, so we were using a national database, an international database. It's on the website, on the web. Bleh, it has a website. I am tired.
Friday, it's all right.
I wrote a blog about the course that I can share with you. Greg's seen this too. So students go into this database, they ask their own research question, they identify a simple statistical test that's appropriate for their hypothesis, they contextualize their research question with primary literature, interpret it in a discussion. So they're writing the whole scientific paper. And I grade their success based on what it means to write this paper, but the steps that we take to get there are quite varied. And if somebody doesn't get it, then they have the opportunity, like if somebody misses a step, they have the opportunity to redo it, and there's lots of feedback. And so the emphasis isn't on getting a score so much as doing the work.
So did anybody fail in that course?
For the first time that I've taught it, no. So I've taught this, I've been teaching the course, let's see, off and on for 13 years. And in all previous iterations, I had about 20% of the course get a D or an F. And this time, my lowest grade was a B.
Wow.
No, why I'm asking it, because we do have something similar even in medical education, which is competency-based education. So you have to be any say clinical skills, you have to be at that level of competency. Then you move on to the next thing.
Can you or can't you? Yeah.
Exactly, but it is so difficult to discriminate. Say, especially the students who are sort of lower performing, and like the good students, it does not really matter. Like students who are, you don't have to do anything. The problem is the borderline. That's why I asked, like, if anybody failed, because how do you determine this person failed and the other person was probably slightly better? And I have trouble discerning the difference. Like it becomes difficult.
Yeah, me too. So in the I would say that rather than ungrading, I did more of a competency-based or specification-based model. And following Linda Nilsson's work, I used an 80% as my cutoff. So if students reached at least an 80%, they passed. And if they didn't reach that bar, they got to redo it.
Interesting.
And so some of the assignments were, they had the opportunity to work with other people on, or I put up different ways for them to learn. The stats section of this class is always pretty intense for some students.
I'll bet, yeah.
So I had written materials for them to work through, or videos of me teaching for them to work through. It was up to them which they wanted to use, and there was opportunity for them to work through problems collaboratively in class. So I'm trying to build, to hold accountability and build flexibility.
Cool.
So if somebody makes a simple error, a careless error on an exam, that's not going to automatically ruin their grade, right? That's allowed. And so somebody who has a lot of test anxiety, that's okay. You know, they can still get an 80% and they pass the test. This is the one class where I have a test, and it's because I tried to have it be a take-home exam before, and students just weren't studying for it. And I want them to learn the statistics. So I felt like I had to nod to dominant culture here and use a test. But then I give them a surprise practice test 1 week ahead of time. And I say, you know, if you've been keeping up with the homework, you should be doing fine on this.
Yeah.
And then their actual test, because the class was, students had the option to take the class remotely. The actual test was correcting the practice test.
Mm.
And then I added a few other, for each student, I wrote a question that was just for them. They're based on a conversation we had, or how can you use this information in your future career as a doctor or a dentist or a physical therapist, or whatever they had in an intake survey, what they'd indicated to me is their career goals.
I think the one other follow-up I would ask on this because this is a fascinating rabbit hole, is how have the students received this?
They were so positive about it. I can't go into detail in writing about this because I don't have IRB approval, but I can say that they were really positive about the class.
Okay. Because when you said no one got below a B, there's not then the perception like, oh, now it's an easy class or something. It's the question of how you get to that B, for instance.
There were more comments about me as an instructor who is caring and supportive, and that this was a class that they could do well in. And some students who thought, I never understood statistics. I thought this course would be too hard for me. And I did it anyway.
I'm not going to get to it this semester, but yeah, I'm reading this book and like thinking about this stuff because I've heard enough people give examples like that make me want to see what I can do and adopt some of these ideas.
It really refocused the attention on learning rather than grades.
Yeah.
And I set the bar for the course at a 3.0. So Nielsen recommends having different tiers for different levels of competency. And so my tier 1 was a 3.0, and that was everything related to the paper. And then I had 2 tiers that were about going deeper into the research process and how society views science. And if students wanted to take those tiers, each of them added 0.5 to the grade. They did both of the tiers, then they could get a 4.0.
Gotcha. Greg,
did your course evaluation change compared to your previous years?
Yeah, they went up.
Positively? It went up? Okay, that's
way
good.
up. Way up.
Greg.
And students in the past felt just overwhelmed by the number of assignments I had. I think in part because of the optional tiers, right? Some students were focused on writing the paper and then wait, I have to think about the difference between a hypothesis and a theory. Like, why am I doing this over here? And this way, the students who didn't really care about that other stuff didn't have to do it. Or if there was just too much for them in a week because of their other courses, they didn't have to do those other assignments. So it gave them flexibility to find their success.
Hey, I wanted to circle back, if I could, to sort of Sabi's earlier issue about like setting the threshold and where do you find good enough? Because I think there's a subtlety in here, which to me seems important, which is built into what I think Becca is doing and a lot of this standards-based grading is the chance for repeated attempts.
Yeah.
And to me, that's great because it takes a lot of pressure off setting the perfect threshold. Like you set a threshold, you try and evaluate it consistently. And then if a student comes up just a little bit short, it's not this awful miss, right? It's like, well, you're almost there, come back and try again next week. So I feel like that's maybe a friendlier and lower stress situation for the instructor and the students, perhaps.
Well, that is true, but from the student's perspective, the student might think, okay, yeah, like maybe I'm not ready for it today, so I'll put something together, or I always have another chance. So it can, you're not always putting in your best. That might be something to think about. Though I'm not saying the exams are the ultimate solution, but probably those are the worst things happening because students are stressed out and the majority of the grade is depending on those midterm and final exam. That's not a good option. No, I like this, but again, I guess there are many things that we need to do, and we learn from once we do it a few times. The next iteration of the course, it gets better, and we learn from our own challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the idea is
and it's a big challenge. Like there's the control question, which is, did I change my standards? Like, did students do better because it was easier to get an A on a paper, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I could have written the standards that I used for this class without having graded beforehand. I'm very confident in my standards now, and I had rubrics that I developed in the past and played with and tested that helped me identify those standards. But if I were to build a class from the ground up, I don't know that I would be able to recognize what success meant,
right,
without understanding that variation in performance ahead of time.
All right. Well, this is really cool. And not just the peer mentoring, but also the sort of talk about grading strategy. It's nice on a Friday afternoon to feel like I've learned something and I want to try different things. So I appreciate you guys sharing your thoughts here today. With this Palm Journal Club, I always like to invite people to share their own papers, not their own papers, but although Greg has done that, or other papers that they may want the group to discuss. Don't hesitate to send me your ideas and I can get them into our circulation. Otherwise, I really appreciate your time today, and I will see you at one of our next sessions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay.